I arrived in Uppsala on a Thursday and had a few days to settle in before my first game playing in Europe. For more about that, check out my previous video. Now it's time to get a taste of what my life will be like working and training in Uppsala on my way to playing volleyball professionally. First things first then is training. We trained Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then had Fridays off. When I played in the UK at Sheffield, we used to have Wednesdays off and train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, because obviously we needed to have Wednesdays off for Bucks. I say obviously, actually, if you're not British, you wouldn't know that. But in the UK, on Wednesdays, that's when all the university sport competitions happen. So Wednesdays, you wouldn't train because that's when you have your matches against other universities. Anyway, I've got to say, I did prefer this way of training where you have a day off in the middle, even if it's still for a match and you're still playing volleyball, because training 4 days in a row, it's really easy for the sessions to blur into one. I talked about this in a previous video that it's quite hard to not let this happen, and you need to work very actively to make sure you break each session up and really have something to focus on. Our schedule each day at training was more or less the same. From 7:15 to 8:15 would be in the gym. We had a program to follow that Michael, our coach, gave us. And then 8:15 would meet in the locker room, change, and Michael would then talk us through what the session was going to be about so we knew what to focus on. And then 8:30 we could start playing. Training like this, where you have the gym first and then the ball session afterwards, obviously isn't ideal because you're more likely to be tired. Say, for example, you've done loads of heavy squatting in the gym, obviously not going to jump as high when it comes to training. But honestly, we don't really have a choice because we're not a professional team in Uppsala, so it's not like we can gym in the morning because people have jobs. The advantage though is that we save a little bit of time because the gym session doubles up as a warm-up. So as soon as it gets to 8:30 and we're into the sports hall, we can straight away start working with the balls because we're already warm physically. Not surprisingly, gymming and training was the highlight of my day. It felt great to be working hard in the gym, turning up every day and making progress. I especially appreciated and enjoyed having a program made for me so you can just look and say, oh, today's Tuesday, that means I do this bit of gym work. Not having to think for yourself about what exercise you do, is this optimal, and you can just focus all your energy on just lifting the weights. Definitely makes life easier. The actual volleyball sessions were also brilliant though. It was a really nice atmosphere to training. I felt like I was learning loads and I was just really enjoying my volleyball. The thing that wasn't going quite so well, unfortunately, was the work-life balance. So we finished training at 10 o'clock. I then have to race home and shower, have some food, and then wind down ready for bed as fast as possible. I know from experience that I really need 9 hours sleep to be anywhere near my best, especially when I'm playing loads of volleyball in sport. If I reliably get less than this, then it hits me really hard and I'll quite quickly get ill. I know obviously no one does well without sleep and it's insanely important, probably the most important thing to do to look after your health. But I think particularly I really do not function well when I'm underslept. So while staying with Jimmy and Harrison, as I mentioned in the previous video, we couldn't stay at our flat yet because there were water damage, so we're staying with a couple of our teammates. It was a 35-minute cycle to the school where I worked. So just doing the maths, if I've got to be in work at about 8:15, then I need to leave at 7:40, then maybe get up at 7:30. That means going back the 9 hours, I've got to go to bed at 10:30. So that means from the second training ends to being asleep, I have 30 minutes. And from waking up to getting out the door, I have 10 minutes. Not surprisingly, this isn't particularly fun. To start and end your day in a mad rush where you're flying around the house, trying to brush your teeth, eat your breakfast, shower all as quickly as possible in a race against the clock, is not particularly enjoyable or I think conducive to really feeling your best. Also, not surprisingly, this would often go wrong because I've got absolutely no margin for error. So say I wanted to talk to Michael after training about something, or when I get home, I want to talk to Meg about how her evening's been, or she wants to know how training was. And if we want to have these conversations, that's straight away eating into my sleep time, which, as I said, is pretty precious. The consequence of all this, for the first month or so, especially while I was staying at Jimmy and Harrison's, because as I say, they lived so far away from where I worked, and because I was too shy to go and talk to my boss about this because I'd only just started, I didn't think it made a great first impression, was that I kind of just suffered through it and was really underslept the whole time. The excitement of how new everything was definitely carried me through things for like the first week or so, but it very quickly caught up with me and I was starting to just feel a little bit miserable and like this is very unsustainable. Not to mention, it was also affecting my training. Naturally, you can't go as hard as you want to, both playing volleyball and in the gym lifting weights, when you're really tired all the time. So that weekend, we had our first away game, and I was about to learn firsthand that Sweden is absolutely enormous. So Uppsala is here on the map, and then these are all of the other teams we play. So you've got 2 of them are in Stockholm, which are give or take an hour. Then Vingåker is one of the other close ones, which is about 2.5 hours. These guys here are about 4.5 hours, and then these ones are all about 6.5. Then Lund down here in Skåne is 7.5 hours. But bear in mind, these are all the times that Google Maps says it would be if you just drove it in one go. In real life, you've got to add in some contingency and then time for a food break and rest stops and all the rest of it. So the average travel time for us for away games is 4.5 hours, as Google Maps says. In real life, it's probably nearer 6.5. I remember a friend of mine from the UK who played professionally in Sweden and then had a season in the Netherlands afterwards, saying to me that when he was in the Netherlands, his teammate said to him, oh, this is a big away game coming up, really sorry about this, it's a long way. And he was like, oh, how far is it? And they were like, 2 hours. And he just laughed because, I mean, that was the closest away game for him where he played. You know, as I say, the average being 6 or 7 hours. So there was a lot of getting up at 5 a.m. for away games this season. And Floby, our opponents of the weekend, being 250 miles away, was no exception. But we arrived there in one piece, time for the game. First things first, sorry the picture quality is so bad. Kind of blows my mind given how good phone cameras are these days. This is the best anyone can come up with, but there we go. So mostly I've used footage from the second set so you can see what's going on our side of the court. You might have noticed that there's no number 14, that would be me on court at the minute. I was quite disappointed to not start this one, but no one's happy to be benched, I suppose. And I'll talk more about my thoughts about getting into the starting six this season in a future video. Fun fact about our opponent Sluby, it's a tiny little town near Felshaping, and given the population is only about 1,500 people, and there's about 150 people in the sports hall, it means you could say that 10% of the population of the town is turning up to watch the volleyball every week. Something else you might have noticed is that Fluby's sports hall is absolutely tiny compared to our home venue. But I actually really like this because it's very familiar. It's much more like the sports halls you get in the UK, which are for the most part school sports halls, which this very much has the vibe of, lots of lines on the floor, whereas we're really lucky that most of the other venues we play, including our home one, are much bigger, more like sort of arena vibes. The downside, however, is the ceiling is really low, and they had a couple of very good jump servers, which made passing an absolute nightmare. Trying to take the pace off a hard serve without jacking it into the ceiling or overpassing was a big ask. Nice, here I come, midway through the second set, get subbed on. If you watched my previous video, you'll remember I talked about wanting to be less passive and really try to leave my mark on the game, especially given coming off the bench. You don't want to just come and hide, you want to really be aggressive and try and bring the game to the other team. So you'll see I really had that in mind when I come to attack here. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go to plan. A for effort, no one can say I didn't try to win the point. I wasn't actually trying to go block out. I was trying to kill the ball past the block, I just completely fluffed it. Similarly then going back to serve, I remember thinking, well, we're down, probably out of the set, unlikely to make a comeback here, so nothing to lose, really give it some beans, and then straight in the net, nice. Obviously not quite the result I was hoping for, kind of amateur hour really. If you're going to go up and hit a serve as hard as you can, it's really important to try and miss long, not missing the net. The thing that went a lot better for me in this game was reception. I think after the first two games I actually had the second best reception stats in the league. Anyway, unfortunately this was a pretty decisive 3-0 loss for us. Like I said, I was happy with my reception and my intentions were good in attack, even if the execution was lacking, but probably fair to say no one was particularly happy after this start of the season. And unfortunately, things were only going to get harder.